Hello, everybody. I'm glad you could be available to join us today. If you're with us for the live session, feel free to drop questions and comments in so we can get back to you in real time. Well, we're here today for the same reason that always brings us together as Great Hearts families and staff, and that's the formation of souls. As parents and educators charged with that great task, we know too well that the world tends to throw obstacles our way. Usually it's the same old stuff recycled in new forms. There are letters that survive from ancient Rome where the older generation complains about the slang the kids are using these days. But there are other challenges that take us by surprise. COVID-19, at least for the short term, has changed how some of us think about teaching and how some of us think about parenting. In both cases, for many of us, it's meant that children are interfacing virtually with others more than before and using screens more than before. Given these circumstances, we thought now is a good time to connect with families and talk through strategies and perspectives that can help us navigate the changing landscape around social media and internet safety. This is something we'd want to do anyway around this time of year with students assembled and parents gathered. But given the circumstances, we're doing it remotely. So we're joined today by two parents of Great Hearts Scholars and experts on the topic of safeguarding our children in the age of social media. Both Dr. Dyer and Ms. Joseph have presented extensively on the subject with students, parents, and teachers throughout the years. I'm really grateful, especially that they could take time out of their own circumstances to share their thoughts with our parent community. So with that, I'll turn things over now to Dr. Dyer. Again, remember that you're free and welcome to, if you're joining us live, drop your comments and reflections into the chat. We'll be able to monitor it and respond in real time. So I'll turn things over now to Dr. Dyer. Dr. Dyer.
Well, thank you, Mr. Altaga, so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be able to be with the other Great Hearts parents. And although I wish, of course, we were all in person, this is still a really great experience to be able to be together virtually and online together. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about technology, the liberal arts, and parenting. And my colleague, Mrs. Joseph, is going to be a lot more practical in her things that she's going to say in a few minutes. But for mine, I want to talk a little bit more theoretically about technology and how it works. But before I do that, I want to tell you a little bit more about me and my family. So we are the Dyer family. My wife, Amber, is a literature professor. She teaches at a nearby college. But our two kids, Benjamin and Rebecca, are in third and fifth grade. You got to get that right? They're finishing up third and fifth grade this year. And I also work at a graduate school in the Dallas area. I teach there, and I also do some administrative work. And in the background, I've always been a web developer. So just to show you a little bit about my own involvement in technology, I've been developing websites for about 20 years and contributed to a number of big companies, one of which was WordPress. So I built the audio video framework for WordPress, which runs about a third of websites right now. And so at the risk of accidentally showing some pop culture here in a Great Hearts setting, I just wanted to show you that this little video player or audio player that's on StarWars.com is something that I developed a few years back. So I've been in the technology world for a long time, and I'm really excited to get to talk about technology with you. And we're going to talk about 8 things, but the first one is just one that I think we have to acknowledge right away, is that everything that we want to do in our homes with technology has to some degree changed in this area of the pandemic. And as much as the phrase "we're all in this together" is kind of cliche, it is true, though, of the way that parents come around technology and they think about how their kids and their friends' kids will interact with one another. And if you're like me, you grew up in the 80s when we didn't have all these same things. And so it seems like from this great painting from the Sistine Chapel that God and humanity are in harmony and things are going really, really great. And then this great comic kind of illustrates that what happens once all of these devices came along, that our world has been disrupted for probably the last 10 to 20 years. And even if smartphones are a lot newer today, there's a lot newer and more pressing distractions to be dealing with. And so we love these things, but we're also trying to figure out how to deal with them. And I also want to acknowledge up front that every one of the families at Great Hearts is going to be a little bit different. We have families families of all different sizes from different religions and ethnic backgrounds, and some have two parents and some have a blended family and some are living with grandparents, that each of us has a unique set of things that we're called to really manage. But we also have some things that are in common. So all of us are probably concerned with technology to some degree. That's going to be common to all of us, even if we come to different conclusions. At the same time, everyone who's a Great Hearts parent is there because we care about our kids' education. We care about the way that they're formed and what they're learning and what kind of person they become as they go out into society. And I think we can all agree that even if we have slight differences in the way that we treat technology, that we're always going to be better when we do these things together. So if we start with that, then we can also acknowledge, man, that technology really does do amazing things. This is part of the reason why I love this career. I know when we first talk about technology, sometimes we come to the worries. So Common Sense Media has done a lot of surveys, and a lot of parents are worried about their kids getting addicted to technology, of oversharing to people who might be predators, of their sleep, all kinds of other worries that we have. We may even be worried about what kind of content they're exposed to online. We know that most kids will see some type of scary or dark images at some point pretty early on. And so we as parents have to have a plan, not just to try to protect them from it, which we do want to do, but also to say, you're going to see something online. You need to have a plan for that. So we tell our kids to close the laptop if they ever see anything that scares them or they know they shouldn't see, and then just to come tell us about it, and we'll keep that dialogue open. But for all these scary things, there's also these amazing things that are out there, right? Of this little girl getting a custom 3D printed arm, that we can be joyful about all the things that humans contribute to civilization, to making things and to making the world better, to promoting human flourishing. Just like this little boy is hearing his dad for the first time, that little finger there, that he got a cochlear implant and now he's hearing. That there is so much of fully awakening all of who we can be as humans when we use technology in a proper way. So I think this gets us to another point about where we are with Great Hearts, is that the humanities themselves actually lead to a kind of humane technology. Steve Jobs was really famous for making this point because he would often want to connect technology and the liberal arts. He would want to connect things that do things, but also with beauty and the human soul. So if we look back into, even if we go into Google and we type in what is technology, it'll give us a definition of things, but it's also going to point us back that our great heroes of the Greek traditions were using this word a long time ago. There's a word techne, which means artisanship or craftsmanship, making things. And they connected this with this word logia, to make technology in the English language. And that even Jesus was called a tecton, a maker. And we translate that word carpenter because we think that the kind of technologist that Jesus was someone who worked with wood and nails. So this goes way back to Aristotle and Plato beginning to talk about the things that we make and how they form us. So again, when we think about traditional education, there's so many wonderful things about it, but its primary aim, I think, is to produce a skilled worker, someone who has a set of skills that allows them to do a job. And that is a good thing. But classical education takes a step back and says, what we really want to do is, yes, to have skills, yes, to have workers, but to produce someone who is full of virtue, who has certain innate qualities and characteristics, that they understand what it means to be a human, and not only what it means to be a human for oneself, but also how to be a contributing citizen in society. So we're focused on developing and cultivating the heart. That's why we call it Great Hearts. And that's why I've got the little shirt here that I'm wearing. We want to produce virtuous citizens who can be skilled workers, but are virtuous citizens first. And this basic idea that Aristotle gives us, that every habit, everything that we do repeatedly, those things are the things that shape us. And whatever we do habitually will eventually transform us into something else. And so we want to expose our kids to things that are good and true and beautiful, and to form them in habits that will make them into the kinds of people who can be virtuous citizens. And believe it or not, the technology people of today are actually saying the best technology workers are those who have that pattern in their lives, not just those who know how to be programmers or engineers, but those who are first virtuous citizens, who have the liberal arts background. So our own Mark Cuban in the Dallas area would say, I think there's going to be a greater demand for liberal arts majors than programming majors. And he goes on to say it's because these are people who can't just look at data and process it, but who understand what it means, who understands what it means to be a citizen in a human society and contribute to its flourishing and do things in an ethically positive way. So Cuban and others are talking about this movement toward needing the liberal arts as a foundation. So we've talked about technology being a good thing, about being compatible with the liberal arts, and now we want to talk about some of the trickier things with technology, the way in which it can sometimes transform us in unexpected ways. So one of the natural conclusions would be to look at a tool like a shovel and just say, hey, look, I realize that you can do good things with a shovel and you can do bad things with a shovel. You can build a house or a castle. That would be good and it would contribute to the society. Or I can do something bad. I can steal something and bury the treasure. But we would say the tool itself, it's obvious that it would be neutral, right? But if we think a little bit more deeply about what happens when you use a shovel, if you use a shovel all day long, your body changes. Your hands get blisters, which turn into calluses. And over time, you're transformed. And the thing that's interesting about this is that whether you're doing something morally good or morally bad, whenever you use a tool, it's shaping you. That shovel is shaping your hands and your body and your mind. And we know this intuitively when we think about how often when we do something repeatedly, it changes us. So when we go to a gym, we choose different tools, different technology, based on how we want it to change us if we use that tool repeatedly. So we know that different types of tools will shape us in different directions. This is obvious to us, but what's not so obvious to us is what does this device do? How does it change us? When we are using phones, regardless of the content, how does it change us? So we often ask questions like, how should I use a phone? What should I use it for? But we also want to become adept at saying, how is it going to shape me? How will it shape my mind, my relationships, and how I commune with others and how I learn? So even Steve Jobs, again, was fond of saying that he loved the iPads for work. He thought they were excellent devices that he could sell to businesses, but he did not want them in his own home. He did not allow his own children to use iPads, not because he was concerned just about the content on the iPads, but because he was concerned about the way it would shape their mind as young people and what it would make them capable or incapable of doing. So if technology is always shaping us when we use any tool, it's also transforming the way that we communicate with one another and how we process and understand information inside and outside of the classroom. So if this was the first slide I had shown at the beginning of the presentation, you might be questioning Mr. Altaga's decision to have me here. And the reason for it is that if you are a Great Heart Scholar, you will probably notice that I have misspelled a word there. I've misspelled the word awesome. I also have truly bad color contrast and bad font choices. What's happening here is that there's a message in the slide that says I'm good at PowerPoint, but the slide itself, the medium, the technology, the color scheme is saying a different message. It's saying I'm not good at PowerPoint. I'm not good at composition. So these two things are in conflict. The medium and the message are saying different things. And we know this when we tell our kids that 90% of communication is nonverbal. It's gestures and hand motions and tone of voice. Well, technology sort of has a tone of voice to it too that shapes what is taken in by us when we communicate with others. When we say, for example, try to tell a joke on a text message, but it's interpreted as something mean. That the technology is reshaping that. Not quite as drastically as this slide, but technology is always doing that. And this is true in the classroom too. A lot of studies has been done on what type of screens in a classroom are helpful. So for example, in this study, it would say that math, science, and reading are all increased or all done better. Kids get higher grades by 10 to 15% when you put a data projector in a classroom. But when you put laptops or desktops or especially tablets in a classroom, students actually decrease their grades by 10 to 15% as well. So you notice that in a Great Hearts classroom, it's not that it's anti-screen or anti-technology, it's just that it's scientifically based decisions about which technologies will form our learners into more virtuous citizens. So our students and our scholars can use those projectors. They can learn about history and geography. They can learn about literature with them. But we found that the data says that having tablets in the classroom wouldn't do that. So again, remember, the goal is to be habituating people in a direction that helps them to see the good, the true, and the beautiful, and to do this over time in a way that changes them by the habits that they have. But that's both in terms of content and in terms of media. So that's why not only why we read the best books, but why we read them on paper, because of what the science tells us about how that paper forms us. Now again, screens are really, really helpful, but we have to remember in our own homes that screens are somewhat ambiguous. What I mean by that is it's sometimes hard to know what a screen is for. So when you see a shovel, you know what it's for. When you see a pan, you know what it's for. When you see a piano, you press the keys and you pretty quickly figure out what it does. But when a kid sees a parent with a screen, it's not entirely apparent what's happening there. The kids have to kind of learn over time what it is that this device actually does. And some of us parents, we actually narrate what it is that we're doing because it's not really clear. Are we being entertained? Are we doing work? Are we socializing? This device, because it can do anything, needs to be formed and shaped in a particular direction by us as parents. I would say one other thing that's worth noting, unlike a shovel, that a lot of our modern technology is designed for addiction. So when we think about an efficient slot machine, an efficient, good, well-programmed slot machine would show all three symbols at the exact same time. But what slot machine owners know is that if you show them in sequence, 1, 2, 3, then each of those creates a dopamine hit that makes you want to pull the lever again. Well, Instagram and Twitter and TikTok and all those things are based on the same principle. If they were designed to be efficient, everything would load at once. But you notice on this Instagram screen, when it comes up, it's blank. And then after a second or two, it shows me the last picture that I saw. And then instead of loading everything all at once, it waits a few more seconds to show me how many likes and friend requests I get. And then it waits a few more seconds to show me more photos. Each one of those is a dopamine hit that's designed to make me want to come back to the application. So these social media platforms are designed in the same way this slot machine is. It's designed for me to return. Because whenever something is free, you and your attention are the product. And so we want to be very careful about teaching our kids about how these things are designed in some ways to manipulate us. One other thing that I like to do with my own kids is to think about not just the idea of screen time, of how much screen time, but to be thinking about what kind of screen time, to be thinking about what the habits are that are forming and shaping them. And so rather than just have one big block of 1 hour or 2 hours of screen time, we like to think about different categories of screen usage. So you notice on the right is kind of all the things that we typically do with a screen. We might consume something that's entertaining as an individual by ourselves. But if we move over onto the left side, if we have any of those categories in mind, if we're doing something that's creative rather than consumption, or maybe we're consuming something but it's enriching and not just entertaining, or maybe we're doing something entertaining but we're doing it together as a community with other friends and people. This changes the characteristics of the screen in I think, some positive ways. So we encourage our kids, if they want to use their screens, that if they're using them for creative things, if they're writing screenplays, or if they're making movies with their friends, or if they're doing enriching schoolwork in the pandemic with Great Hearts, these are all excellent uses of screens. But leaning totally onto the right side of consumptive entertainment by themselves, those are the things that we want to try to avoid. And so as we think about these things, we want to just remind ourselves that this is going to be a communal effort. If we're going to figure out how to use and navigate technology well, we need to come together as a community to do this. So there are some things as we think about the ages of our kids, as we move them from birth out to launching them into becoming virtuous citizens, there are some blocks that we can be thinking through together as to when we might want our kids to do things. So the science, the American Pediatric Association would say that from 0 to 2, kids really shouldn't have screen time at all. That even programs that promise to be educational really aren't educational, that they don't do anything good for our kids. In fact, they might hold them back. And then from 2 to 6, really we want to limit these things to an hour a day and try to keep them to things that they're doing with other people and not just by themselves. Now, again, we have to recognize that in this era, we're in a kind of a unique time. And if we have kids of a variety of different age ranges, these are really hard to do. But these are kind of the science. These are the things that our doctors tell us that would be the ideal and best case. But as we get older into elementary school, this is where it gets a little bit tricky. Thinking about when our kids enter into school, how can we help them know that when they're using a screen, screens are for creativity, for making things, for doing things for other people, not just for entertainment. And as they get later on into elementary school, how do we teach them how to use the internet, but also make sure that it's as protected as possible, that they don't just have open devices, open phones, or open computers, but that we've done some work to maybe have a router or use the screen time tools on your Android or your Apple devices to make sure that they're as protected as possible. And as we move into the later middle school years, we begin to think about things like maybe offering our kids a dumb phone at a particular age and saying, yes, we want you to be able to communicate, but we don't want to have a device full of all the things that are designed to distract you and designed to keep you coming back. But at some point, before our kids go out into society, we need them to know how to use these things. And so we might choose 16 as an age where we might send our kids out with a device. Wherever you are along the spectrum, pairing alongside with other friends and other parents and saying, together we're going to do it at these ages so that we can, as a community, come around our kids and help shape them in a helpful way. So I hope those give you some good tips, some initial starting points and understanding of how technology works. And now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Mrs. Joseph, who will go into some more depth, some more really practical ways of thinking through social media. Thank you so much.
My name is Heather Joseph, and I've spoken on this topic to groups of parents and students throughout the Metroplex, and I'm so honored to be able to share it with you, the Great Hearts community, as a fellow Mustang parent. When thinking about parenting our kids in technology, the approach that I recommend is that of mentoring. And mentoring has 3 steps. The first is that we lead by our example. So the behavior that we expect to see in our kids, that we model that ourselves. Secondly, that we have knowledge of our teen's digital world in order to effectively guide him. And third, which is extremely important, is that we guide our teen by having ongoing conversations with him, just as we would with anything else that's going on in his life. In my presentation today, I have 13 tips that I hope that you will consider using as talking points in your own conversation with your teen. So let's start with discerning if your teen is ready. The world of social media is not for kids. It's an adult world. And that's because we can't control what other users post. So it's inevitable that your teen will be exposed to inappropriate images and content, as well as other drama and challenges that this platform brings. It will make her grow up faster, but probably not in the way that you want if she's not ready. So some questions to consider are, does she have the self-control and maturity to use it responsibly? Also, how is her relationship with you as her parent? Because when the challenges come, you'll want her to come to you for guidance and help. Also, I wanted to share, when I gave this presentation to high schoolers, there was a fabulous girl that I knew personally that came up to me afterwards and mentioned that she was going through everything that I had talked about and that it was a burden for her. And she had actually wished that her parents hadn't given her access to social media when they had given her a smartphone. And so ultimately, the question that we want to think about is, and I think it's also even good to talk about this with our teen when they're asking us, and so we're letting them know our decision-making process. When considering your teen's struggles and also their strengths, would it be a burden for her to have social media, or would she be ready for it? I think a good general rule to have is to permit what you can promote. And that simply means when our teen comes to us to ask for a Snapchat account, perhaps because all his other friends have it, we don't say sure, not knowing what it is. But that if we stick with this general rule, permit what you can promote, the responsibility lies with us as the parent to learn about it, to see it's something that we want to allow. Common Sense Media is a great resource. I know everyone here listening is pressed for time. They have great articles that you can read in less than 10 minutes. And here I've added some screenshots on their article on Snapchat. And you can see that it's very thorough. So I encourage you to do the research when your teen comes to you to ask if he can have so-and-so app. And other great resources are Protect Young Minds and Protect Young Eyes. I also think that it's very important that we do a test drive ourselves first, because some apps may seem fairly harmless, but when you start using them, you might think, oh, the content that's posted is actually it's not what I'm ready for my teen to see yet. Perhaps the advertisements are sexualized or there are chat rooms. So we should know the dangers before our teen discovers them. And so if we're on board and we feel it's something we would promote, then sit down with your teen to share the good, the bad, and best practices so that he can be safe online. A big question for adolescents is, who am I? And discovering who they are during this time. So if they seek the answer on social media, which many teens do, where they go to social media for validation, it'll be the wrong one. So before delving into this next topic, which is related, I think it would be so good to share with your teen her value. And her value is that she is loved and that your love is unconditional. That means nothing she says or does can increase or decrease your love for her. And so whether she loses 10 pounds or is a star athlete or is on the honor roll, your love will be the same. It is love without any conditions. Because when she goes online, she's going to make self-comparisons. She might think, I wish I was skinny like her. I wish I looked like her or had as many followers as her. Her life looks so perfect. But it's important that they know that it's not a fair comparison. A lot of editing goes behind the pictures to make them appear natural and effortless. And secondly, teens don't post on Instagram about real life stuff, homework troubles, or the argument they just had with their dad. So the images she sees are someone's highlight reel. I encourage you to share the story about Asina O'Neill to illustrate this point. Asina was an ordinary teen in Australia, and up until she started posting beautiful pictures of herself. Soon she gained over 500,000 followers on Instagram just because of her posts. She also became an influencer where designers contacted her and would pay her to wear their clothes. So she was very involved in posting on Instagram and living the life of an influencer. But then she started to feel guilty because she would receive many comments from teens saying how they wish, they had her life. Her life seems so perfect. They wish that they looked like her. And so she felt badly because her followers were comparing their ordinary life to her made-up one. So she quit social media and went back to some of her Instagram posts and posted the reality behind the image. So not shown here, there's an image where she's in a swimsuit on the beach, and she describes the full day of work that it took. So first of all, she didn't eat at all the day before so that she could look slim. Then she went to the beach with her sister. It was a hot day. She had her sister take 100 shots just so that the lighting would be right, the angle would be right. And during that entire time, she said, which took several hours, she was yelling at her sister because she was hot and she was faint from not having eaten the day before. And then after the photo shoot, she comes home and she photoshops the picture on different apps just to make it look perfect. And so basically she spent a whole day of work so that she could post a picture where she looks effortlessly beautiful and natural at the beach so that she could get validation from strangers. So encourage your teen to guard her imagination when she's online and to remember the reality behind what she sees. This is particularly important if your teen struggles with anxiety or depression. Many would say that Maddie Holleran had it all. You can see from the pictures that she was extremely beautiful. She also was a top student and a great athlete. She went to UPenn on a track scholarship. But when she was at UPenn, she would look at the pictures that her friends would post, and she would compare her life to theirs. And she would think, they look so happy at parties. And she didn't feel very happy when she was at parties, even though she posted the same pictures, where she was at parties looking very happy. In fact, when she brought this up to her mom, that she wasn't feeling very happy inside, her mom's response was, "But you look so happy in your pictures." And Maddie's response was not to believe everything you see in pictures. But unfortunately, she couldn't live this herself. During her second semester at UPenn, at the age of 19, she committed suicide, having her whole life ahead of her, this beautiful girl with so many great gifts. And when I share these examples of Asina O'Neill and Maddie Holleran with students, I have their complete attention. These stories resonate because images are so powerful, and the feelings that we feel, even adults feel them, when we look at pictures of perfection on social media, can steal our joy if we let it. So it's very important that we share with our teen the reality behind these images, and also to check in often with our teen, especially if you see her spending a lot of time on social media and you notice her behavior change for the worse. I think we can all agree that teens aren't known for their great judgment, and that's because their brains aren't fully developed until they're 25. So when they're making decisions, it's occurring in the emotional part of their brain, not the rational part, which is how adults make decisions, through the rational part. So they tend to live in the moment and not think of future consequences as much. So I really encourage you to sit down with your teen and to help them to think before they post, because regret can happen with one click. And there's many things to think about and to consider before they post. But in general, I would just summarize it as, would you say it to their face? I see social media as an ongoing conversation until you can see the person the next time. So you're just trying to keep up that conversation. So just as in face-to-face conversation, you wouldn't go, look at me. I'm so popular. I'm so pretty. I have a great life. We don't want our posts to communicate that either. And just as we wouldn't complain to a person's face about them or badmouth them, make critical comments to their face, we don't do that online either. So we want to keep critical comments, anything negative, offline, because social media is not the forum for that. We also want to help our teens to see that posts are permanent. Don't let privacy settings give you a sense of false security, because anyone can take a screenshot of that image and forward it to somebody else. And they become part of something called a cyber footprint, which is your online activity. And if you want to check out to see what is your cyber footprint currently, you can Google yourself and see what comes up. And there are real consequences if we post using bad judgment. There were a group of 10 students who had been accepted to Harvard, and what they thought was a private GroupMe chat, they shared very offensive memes and images. And Harvard got wind of it and rescinded the acceptance letters of those 10 students. So I'm sure it was a very hard lesson learned for them. So just remember we want to create a positive digital footprint, and even maybe consider social media and what you post as a spiffier version of yourself. Another suggestion is to place the face. When our kids were young, we taught them not to talk to strangers. And this rule applies online too. So this means that we follow and friend those people that we know. Here in this example, you can see this person who's clearly a man is posing as a female with online. People may not be who they say they are. And I think that it's so good for our kids to realize that, just how cautious they would be with strangers. They need to have that same caution when they're online. There's a story about Megan Meyer. When she was 13 years old, she had a social media account. And her mother did have this rule where she could only friend those that she knows. However, she was contacted by a very good-looking guy named Josh Evans who wanted to be her friend. So she begged her mother to make an exception to the rule, and her mom did. So Megan and Josh frequently contacted each other, and they formed an online relationship. And soon Megan was revealing very intimate details about herself to Josh Evans. But in actuality, Josh was not really Josh. It was a mother of her former best friend, Lori Drew. Lori and her daughter and an employee of Lori actually had control of this account. And what they had done was they had just taken some picture of a cute guy and created this fake account, trying to lure Megan to reveal a lot about herself. And the big blow was that when this had been going on for a while, when Lori Drew had gained Megan's confidence, she wrote something really mean. And she said that life would be better without you. This world would be better without you. And Megan didn't understand why Josh would do this to her, because she felt they had this great connection. And she committed suicide. And she never knew that it was actually the mother of her former best friend who had lured her into doing this. And there are many other stories that are like this. But once again, we want to drive the point home to our teen to face to face. Don't talk to strangers online, because it is very easy to take a picture of somebody and post it and create an account using that picture. Another great rule to have is to keep drama offline. So some examples of drama might be a friend revealing a secret or being exclusive. Perhaps they created a group chat and they didn't include you, or receiving an angry text. When this happens, don't react immediately. Take it offline. Remember that posting or texting should be kept positive. So when you feel that you're in control of your emotions, then call the person or ask them if you can see them in person, because it helps so much to hear the person's tone and to receive all of those nonverbal communication cues that Dr. Dyer mentioned earlier for these types of sensitive conversations. A mom shared with me that when her daughter started out on social media, she band together with 6 other moms, and these were the moms of her daughter's closest friends, and they agreed to follow their daughter, and that if they saw anything that was posted that was problematic, they would let each other know. And they understood that mistakes would happen, so they weren't going to make a big deal about it, and there would be no parent shaming. And I thought that this was such a fantastic idea. So I encourage you to do the same, to talk to the parents of your daughter's friends or your son's friends, and perhaps even say, if you ever see something that my son is doing that you think that I would like to know, please let me know. With your teen about what to do if he is ever a victim of cyberbullying. And cyberbullying is different than online drama. Cyberbullying has a meanness to it, and there might be a threat. So it could be spreading rumors about someone online, or pretending to be someone else to spread hurtful messages. Should this ever happen, let them know to take a screenshot of the message and to change their privacy settings to prevent further contact, and always to let you know so that you can help them to deal with it. One of the most important things for our teen to have is an internal filter. I think most of us have a filter on our devices, and we can think of that as the first line of defense from preventing bad images from coming into our home. But we don't want to have a false sense of security, because there are many other ways to get around a filter, even accidentally, such as seeing something that's inappropriate at a friend's house. So we want to help our kids to have an internal filter where they choose not to look. So how do we do this? We want to sit with our kids and to define what is an inappropriate picture. And that simply is an image that shows body parts that a swimsuit would cover. And we can share that with our 7-year-old who is starting to go online, because most likely once anybody starts going online, they're going to encounter sexualized images. So we also want to share with our teen about the evils of pornography. Pornography is a false, twisted view of sex. Sex is something that is beautiful. It's about love and respect for each other in a relationship. And it's making a gift of yourself to the other person instead of being an object of someone's gratification. And that's what porn does. It makes the other person into a tool. And so after you have this conversation with your teen, you want to give them an action plan if they should see inappropriate pictures in porn. And the action plan is, number 1, if they see it, close the screen. And secondly, that image is probably going to be in their head. And so to get rid of that, or to not dwell on it, have them say a phrase. It could be a line of a song or a line of poetry, or if you're a person of faith, a prayer, a short prayer. And also to change the image in your mind with another image. So when you're having this conversation with your teen, help them to come up with a go-to phrase or a go-to image. So when this happens, they can automatically go to that image or say that phrase. And also to tell you, the parent. And I want to mention here to please share with your teen that when he comes to you, there will be no shaming, and it will actually be the opposite. He will have earned your trust. There's a mom that shared with me that a few days before she and her husband were going to give her son a smartphone, and they had taken a lot of time, to discern whether or not he was ready. And he was actually just one of the few boys left in his grade that did not have a smartphone. So they had held out for a while, but they felt that he was very responsible and could handle it. And so, but a few days before they were going to give him a smartphone, he came to them and told them that at school, the boys were passing around a video, and he was really curious, and he gave in and he looked at it, and it was porn. And it shocked him, and it made him feel sick inside to see it. And he actually said, that he didn't want a smartphone, that he was fine with just the other things that he had, because of what he had seen. And the parent was so happy that he came to her to tell her so that they could talk about what he had seen and how to deal with it. And so I share that with you because I think it's so good for our teens to know that we're here for them. And no matter what they see or they do, to always come to us when something happens. Before in my introduction, one of the most important aspects of mentoring is to have ongoing conversations with our teen about their digital world. And so especially in regards to this internal filter and how they're dealing with what they're seeing, check in often with them to see how they're doing and help them to process what they've seen. And should your teen ever be in a situation where they need an easy way out, for example, let's say they're at a friend's house and a friend of an older sibling comes by and he's looking at porn, but your teen feels uncomfortable calling you on the phone to pick him up to give you the reason why. But if you have a code word that he can say, then when he uses that word, you immediately will come by and pick him up. And no one there will know the reason why you're actually coming. So I encourage you to talk to your teen to come up with a code word that she can use to have an easy and safe way out. Next, I want to share about how we can help our teen use time well, because we know that we can waste so much time on our gadgets. So first of all, I'd like to share a few stats from Common Sense Media from 2018 and 2019. They found that on average, teens spend an average of 7 hours a day on all media, and this is not for homework or for school purposes. That's a lot of time, 7 hours. It's almost like a work day. And 61% of teens use social media for 2 hours a day. And that's considered being a heavy user. Anything that's 2 hours or more is considered being a heavy user on social media. 61% also watches online videos for 1.5 hours a day. So this is a little bit about how they use social media within that 7 hours. And a lot of time is also just spent watching television. In regards to social media, their favorite apps are Snapchat, Instagram. They also like Facebook and TikTok. And their favorite app of choice to watch videos is YouTube. 78% of teens check their phones hourly, and 50% feel addicted to their phones. And that's from a Common Sense Media 2015 survey. A teen mentioned to me that when she and her friends get together physically, so this is face to face, they check their phones every 2 minutes. So why is checking our phones and going online our default when we have a moment? And I am including adults in this as well, because I think that we also struggle with this. And specifically, I want to mention this is not for creation, but for consumption and entertainment. John Parker, who was on the executive team in the founding years of Facebook, talks about how when he and the team, including Mark Zuckerberg, would meet, they would talk about how do they get users to generate more content, and to use Facebook more. And what they came up with is that we need to give you a little dopamine hit every once in a while because someone liked or commented on a post. That's going to get you to contribute more content. So because we're looking for that dopamine hit, the potential for it, coupled with how easy it is to check anytime we want because our devices, our smartphones are mobile and they're with us all the time if we want it to be. There's this expectation that we're available to respond to texts and posts 24/7. And each time we check, even if we don't get that dopamine hit, that we don't get that like on our post, we're sucked into the black hole that's the internet because we find ourselves scrolling and clicking and watching videos and basically entertaining ourselves to distraction. So you might think, well, what's the big deal? But giving into checking and wasting time in our devices has a cost to parents and to our kids. As parents, we teach our kids that a meaningful life is one that requires sacrifice and generosity. It's a life lived for others. But when you're plugged in, you've tuned out reality and responsibilities. It's hard to notice a sibling that needs help putting on his shoes or that the table is ready to be set for dinner, or all the other ways to help make life easier for those around you. Consumptive screen use has a formative effect that teaches that life is easy and about being entertained. So it's very hard to live for others when you're living for yourself. So an antidote to help our teen to not waste his time is to help him to see that going online has its time and place. And first of all, to control your curiosity and be discerning as to what you consume. So there's a saying, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And this means that just because we can go on social media and spend hours and hours on it looking at people's posts, or consume as many YouTube videos as possible, or look up an inordinate amount of celebrity gossip, it doesn't mean that we should. And this kind of consumption can be harmful for our soul. We might think that perhaps, it's out of pursuit of knowledge, but knowledge always leads to wonder and wisdom. We want to be serious about guarding our time because time wasted is time stolen from our lives. And sometimes we may not realize how much time we've been spending on a particular app or even just on our device in general. So it can be useful to have a digital wellness app to keep track of the time spent on our phone. And some examples are Moment or Action Dash. We can also encourage our teen to band with her friends to check less often because it's so hard to live this if you're the only one out of your group of friends doing it, because you may feel that you're missing out or the pressure to respond to posts. But if your teen can band with her friends, then they can help each other live the struggle together. We can also help our teen balance consumptive screen use with more worthwhile activities, especially with summer upon us. And if your teen is not going to be going online as much, he's going to have a lot of downtime. Something a friend mentioned to me that has helped me so much is when you take something away, put something better in its place. So sometimes, some of us, it might work to say, go find something to do, with your downtime. And it is good that kids have downtime where they can just be creative and have time to think and reflect. But it's also helpful to have some goals for our teen, and I feel to give them a little nudge in achieving those goals. So since many of us will be homebound this summer, one goal could be to make life easier for those in the family by doing acts of service or acts of charity. And I love that we call it acts of charity, because when we do acts of charity, the recipient doesn't grow in this virtue of charity. It's the giver. So the more acts of charity that someone does, the more that they grow in love for others. And so this relates back to our goal as parents and wanting to help our kids live a life for others. So some concrete practical suggestions are perhaps an older sibling can buddy up with the younger one to do something enriching every day. So yes, they may have playtime, but also maybe it's good to do something that's enriching, such as maybe the younger sibling needs tutoring or help going over math facts, or perhaps the older sibling can listen to the younger one practice reading. And all of this can help to free up time for mom. So it's a great act of charity. Perhaps as a parent, you can also assign the kids that are of age and are able to a meal to prepare each week for the family. For example, making breakfast on Monday mornings. Another great worthwhile activity is reading. And to encourage it, sometimes we might say, oh, go read something. It does wonders to have the book already there for them in their line of sight to pick up, especially if it's a book that's not going to be considered easy reading for them and that they might need some encouragement to pick up. So my husband does this for my kids, where he'll get the book from the library or he'll order it online and he'll put it in a place where they like to hang out. And they always read the book. You can also consider your kids' interests and a possible hobby that they might like to develop, and then help them to get it off the ground. So during this time of quarantine, for my oldest daughter, I know that she's on the creative end, so I introduced her to graphic design, and she's been spending a lot of time, flexing her creative muscles for her projects, such as designing a newsletter that we've been sharing with our family and friends. So with anything, but especially those tasks that require more effort from our teen, such as perhaps reading that challenging book or helping a sibling with his math facts, that we follow up with questions every day. Our interest in their activity gives importance to it in their eyes. And so this gives them the motivation to keep it up. And just in general, it's a good reminder to tell our teen, don't just post an amazing life, but live one. The next tip I want to talk about is to set family tech rules. And this is so important because, as I mentioned earlier, teens make decisions based on their emotions and how they're feeling. So if left up to them, if there weren't any boundaries, any rules, they would most likely choose the easier route, which is just to check their phone and spend a lot of time on devices. And so it's important that we have family tech rules. And I just want to mention also that these rules also apply to the parent. There's a Common Sense Media study that says that over 54% of children feel that their parents check their phones too often. So as I mentioned earlier, when I talked about mentoring in the first step, that as parents, we want to model the behavior that we expect from our kids, because otherwise we're going to lose credibility. A golden rule that I would like to suggest is to live no personal screen time when around family and friends. And this simply means that when we're around other people, we're not looking at our device when they want our attention. So for example, if we're sitting on the sofa, looking at our phone, reading the news, and our daughter comes by and wants to chat with us, we put our phone away and we make that eye contact with our daughter. Also, to have screen-free times in the family, such as family get-together times where you're hanging out and meal times. And when we have these set times, that we put the phone in another room and set to do not disturb. Because there are studies that show that even having the phone in our line of sight makes our conversation more distracted. Also, to use and store devices in a common area. So no phones in the bedroom. I think we all know of stories of teens that when they're able to have a computer in their room or to use their devices in their room, they're in there for a very long time and we don't see them. And so in general, it's good to use devices in common areas and to store them in common areas. And if your teen wants an alarm clock, buy them an actual alarm clock. Also, Set screen time limits. It can be weekday versus weekend, so perhaps more time on the weekend. Set a time and duration and stick to it. And in general, it's good to go for less personal and more family screen time when you can. It's more social and can be a great way to model great tech habits for your kids. It's important to help our teen to prioritize face-to-face time with his friends. And that's because in order to have a deep friendship with anyone, it requires to spend time with that person face-to-face and in person. I think even, as an adult, when we look back, when we're looking back about the moments that we've had with our friends, we're not thinking about, that great Instagram post or that funny meme that this friend sent. But we're thinking our memories are made up of things that we did with our friend, this camping trip or this bike ride that we did every Saturday morning, or this particular thing that happened that was so funny. And so we want to help our kids to have these types of memories also. My final tip, and the most important one, is to spend quality time with your teen. Mentoring falls apart if we don't have a strong relationship with our son or daughter. Before, when we told our son or daughter about how much we love them and that our love is unconditional, the way that they know that that's true is if we spend time with them. Because our spending time with our teen gives them value. It makes them know that they are loved because mom put away her work in order to spend time with me, to know me. The time that we've invested in them will help to build that strong relationship so that in times when they need us, they'll come to us. Meg Meeker, a pediatrician of over 30 years, talks about for a young person, time spent with their parent expands in their eyes through the course of the years. For example, if a dad takes out his daughter once a month on a Saturday for breakfast, his daughter will grow up to share with her friends that every Saturday morning, my dad took me out for breakfast when I was a child. So that's just how much our kids value the time spent with us as their parents. There's an anecdote that I'd like to leave you with. When Charles Adams, the son of John Quincy Adams, took his son out one day to go fishing, so they spent the whole day fishing, he went home and he wrote in his journal, "Went fishing with my son, a day wasted." But his son, Henry Adams, wrote in his journal that same night, "Went fishing with my father today, the most glorious day of my life." On behalf of Mr. Altaga, Dr. Dyer, and myself, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us virtually today. Our hope is that you've come away from this with some ideas to help your teen to be safe online and to have a healthy relationship with social media. If you didn't get a chance to ask your question during the presentation, feel free to drop a line in the comments section and we'll respond to you over the course of the next few days. Thanks so much.